Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Therigatha Festival. I am Ayya Vimalanyani, and with me today is Ayya Sudhamma. Ayya, thank you so much for joining us today. It's such a pleasure to have you. Ayya, I will briefly introduce you to our audience. Bhikkhuni Sudhamma Theri was previously an attorney, and then she received novice ordination from Bhante Gunaratana at the Bhavana Society in 1999. And she received higher ordination from the Bhikkhuni Sangha in Sri Lanka in 2003. She led the Carolina Buddhist Vihara in Greenville, South Carolina for 8 years. And in 2013, Ayya Sudhamma established Charlotte Buddhist Vihara in her hometown, Charlotte, North Carolina. And she has a special interest in the Therigatha and has studied them in depth throughout her very long monastic life. So I'm very privileged that you agreed to join us today and to answer a few questions. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
So my first question is, a few weeks ago, when I invited you to join the festival, you were quite enthusiastic, I felt. And you also remembered the exact day when you first heard of the Therigatha. And you said that was March 16th, 1996, so more than 25 years ago. And I thought that was quite remarkable that you remembered the day. And I would like to invite you to share the story with us.
Thank you. Do you mind if I start with homage to the Buddha?
Yes, of course.
Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang Dhammang Sanghang Saranang Gacchami. Okay, so how's the sound? Shall I increase it a little?
No, it's very, very good. No problem.
You hear some rustling in the background. There's a cat making some noises. So a little bit of background, that I was introduced to Buddhism, or rather Buddhist meditation, by Thai monks in 1992, late 1992. And at that time, I was having symptoms of cancer. I wasn't working. I'd quit my job thinking they'd overworked me, and but it was a steadily increasing situation with the cancer. And when I met the monks, they taught me a meditation that put me into a blissful state, and this cranky attorney mind. It was just awesome. And so I wanted that. Also really liked the food and the joy of the interaction of the Thai restaurant workers and the monks. They would bring the very best to the monks. And so then, of course, the whole cancer chaos hit the fan and all of that. And then I became convinced about Buddhism, not from the monks, but actually while I was in the hospital with cancer, I read transcribed, translated talk from the monk who was the teacher of a monk who had taught me some meditation, and realized that Buddhism was all about training the mind so that you don't have to suffer no matter what happens. And there I was in a state of tremendous physical and emotional suffering, with a bucket under my arm at 2 a.m. In hospital in tremendous pain from the cancer and treatments. And so I wrote in my journal, these Buddhists really know what they're talking about. So fast forward a bit, whenever the monks taught the Dhamma, I still didn't want to really hear it, or I listened a little bit. I mean, at that moment I had become a Buddhist, but I would listen, but I actually, I take that back. That was earlier. I didn't listen at all. But I still had no real access to Buddhist books. This was before the internet as we know it. Buddhist books weren't so widespread as they are now. The people I was associating with certainly didn't have access to Buddhist books in English. So I was learning to read Thai characters in order to be able to chant alongside them. Mm-hmm. So that is where I was with that. And then I visited a Burmese monastery for a few weeks, doing a self-retreat there and helping out there a bit. And I discovered a cabinet full of dusty books. And I got a monk to unlock it for me. And there was the Pali Canon in English, which I had never encountered before. And I immediately pulled the Jataka down and sat there enjoying Jataka stories, because anything like that, I love stories. And I'm totally absorbed in anything like that. And a Burmese monk walked by, looked at me, and he says, no. And he goes and he pulls a couple of books of early Buddhist text, more type scripture, and set it down beside me. Read that. Okay, well, I was really enjoying my Jataka tales. And so I picked up the Therigatha and Psalms of the Sisters, I think it was entitled. And I sat there reading that for a bit. I'm like, okay, that was interesting. And then I picked up another of the books he had set in front of me, the middle-length discourses, and read some, just opened it to Simile of the Snake. And at this point, I am not pleased. The Simile of the Snake is this discourse in which the terror and pain of sense pleasures when pursued and grabbed onto is laid out in many similes. Simile of the skeleton, such as a dog gnawing a bone that has no meat and nothing on it, just smeared with a little blood. It's inherently unsatisfying. Simile of the piece of meat, like a bird, maybe a hawk, has snatched up a piece of meat and the entire flock is attacking it until it drops it, and so forth. So all of these really intense similes, but I liked sense pleasures. I thought they were the best thing. And so I sat there, closed the book. And I sat there pondering, why did those nuns in the Psalms of the Sisters speak so disparagingly of sense pleasures, the pleasures of life, meaning of life? Why did the Buddha himself have such a wrong idea? Why did he have such a misled idea, wrong idea about the sense pleasures? And then it hit me, maybe they were right. And that's what made that first reading of the Therigatha memorable to me, because my hair stood on end all over my body. I had goosebumps all across my arms and down my back, and hair standing up. Maybe he was right. Maybe they were right. Maybe the sense pleasures really are that dangerous. And that was a shocker. And so I informed a nun who was associated with that temple, Dr. Rina Surkar. I informed her that I wanted to take an additional precept. Not the full 8 precepts, just the additional one that would cut down on the whole sense pleasures plunging into bit. And she said she would tell the monks, but I think they were resistant. And so this was actually a couple of days later. So the moment I was exposed to the Therigatha was probably more like March 14th or so. And I'm waiting around expecting the monks to say, okay, now, and that didn't happen. So I confronted the monks in a very, very American way. And I told them, excuse me, I'd like you to give me these precepts. And they said, well, you can take the 8 precepts. I'm like, no, I want the 5 precepts plus this. And they said, you could have 8. And we argued. And finally, I shouted at them that you will give me the 5 precepts plus this precept. Knowing what I know now, I just shake my head. But they were astonished, very astonished, and they gave me that the 5 precepts together with that additional precept. So, and that is what I have marked on my calendar as March 16th. Mm. And so after 3 months, I renewed that at my altar. And after 6 months, I renewed it again, and then thought, no, I can do this for life. And so at that moment, I became a celibate for life. 6 months after that March 16th moment. And so that was, that is what made the whole occasion so memorable to me. I wasn't a nun. I was still a regular lay person at that time. But I saw the burden, I saw the depravity, I saw the difficulties in it. It's like if someone were offering your favorite dessert, like a chocolate cake, and you're enjoying it, but then you realize someone just stuck a little arsenic in it. You're like, mm-hmm. Okay, you know, it's fine. I'm good. I'm good. It's okay. It's still all that deliciousness, but you just know something else about it.
Mm. Okay. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Very good decision. So the Therigatha prompted you to ordain then, I think. And what I heard from you, sorry?
Yes, it definitely was behind it. Because once you start withdrawing from some parts, you know, I couldn't wear makeup because it seemed so cruel to just tempt people into a certain mind state. That's not even good for us. It's like, why would I do that? And I was pretty back then. I mean, that might have made a difference. and earrings and that sort of thing. Why would you do that? So just, you know, the life just calmed down more and more. And then I started keeping 8 precepts in my home all the time, just as a lifestyle for a long period. And yeah, things did lead step by step towards ordination. And then there was a particular retreat where things changed for me quite a bit. And then I definitely I didn't see anything else that I wanted in lay life, frankly.
So what you've told me is like from the day of your ordination or even before, the Therigatha were always very special to you. And you also told me that during the last year, you taught classes on the Therigatha every week. So maybe you could share a little bit with us what were the most remarkable or the most outstanding things that you learned from, you know, delving so deeply into the text, and what inspirations did you gain from the Therigatha? What things did you learn?
So I want to pause to correct any misperception that I'm a scholar. I'm a dullard. So I can speak of my enthusiasm and my love for it, but deep scholarship I have to leave to others, and with great appreciation to them. Now I have a website up with my own rendering, and a friend took some liberties and called it translation. But I think rendering is a more fair description. That's therigatha.org. I've gotten distracted from the project, so I just put up the ones that I happened to be working on at the time with my group, and then sort of lost track. So it's still in the works. It's still going to be updating with more poems. But I think I'd been thinking about, I knew you were going to be asking something along these lines, and I had been thinking about it. And the answer I came up with doesn't exactly match your question now. So, oh dear.
That's okay. No problem.
But what I want to mention that's so powerful to me about it is the sense of transformation, spiritual transformation, that we see, if not in every poem, in many of them, most of them, more so than in other texts. I do also love the stories of transformation that we find sprinkled more liberally in commentarial accounts, commentarial tales, and stories such as Angulimala's transformation. Love the story of probably the world's worst serial killer, coming around and becoming one of the greatest of arahants. So it's kind of hard to top that one. Sorry, I don't know if you hear the scratching he's doing. And I recently have been doing a course on acceptance of death. And I did it in great part just out of curiosity, but was surprised by the depth it went to. This is not a Buddhist course, actually. It's from a YouTube star, Caitlin Dowdy, who does Ask a Mortician videos on YouTube. Mm-hmm. So that's my occasional vice and escape for things like Ask a Mortician on YouTube. And so this course really actually uncovered some things I absolutely had not expected. And one of the things that it had us do was to write down our top 5 favorite memories and reflect on how they're about the people around us or adventures or experiences, and then reflect on what we could do in the remainder of our time, whatever it might be, to further enhance the quality of life by being informed by this. And so other people wrote in about how they recognized that the important thing for them in all their memories was relationships with other people. All of mine were about transformation. Well, 4 out of 5 top ones. And I couldn't just sit down and write top ones. I wrote down 20-something favorite memories. And vast majority had to do with something around spiritual power or spiritual transformation. That's what stuck. The people around it were irrelevant. And I felt so terribly ashamed. Like, wow, what a freak. All these other people all about the memories of their loved ones. And, I had one that was about a memory of a loved one, nothing, childhood one, not an adult one. And so I thought, oh, this is terrible. And then it hit me that maybe being a nun was actually a pretty good life choice for me, since that's what all my favorite memories were focused on, or so many of them. And what we find in the Therigatha are statements of spiritual power and statements of transformation and spiritual transformation, and that's where my mind lives. That's where my heart lives. That's what it's all about for me. So there you go. Just before we spoke, I was looking for a certain text, and I stumbled across something. It's funny. It's a notebook that I hadn't looked at in many, many years. It's just been sitting in a corner, and I kind of dusted it off looking for this other thing just a few minutes ago. And right on the front of this notebook, it's a notebook of my own writings, which I used to keep and stopped a long time ago. I don't know why. But anyway, right there on the front is a poem that I wrote in the fall of 1999, so a couple of months after my going forth. So if you'll bear with me, now it's not great poetry. I never had any training in poetry, frankly, but this was expressing a feeling that I had in my heart before and immediately after my going forth novice ordination. The title is Ordinariness. We gather in enclaves, voices rising above the storm raging outside, playing cards, chatting gossip, voices warm and secure, against the greater forces without and within. When the storm sweeps in among us, devastating our minds, breaking our hearts, we cry out, shock, anger, fear, grief and fear. Don't we gather again, mourn the loss, creating order out of the debris? Here it is safe, we decide, and again warm ourselves with ordinariness. Yet some among us watch the window, seeing the storm within, wondering, doesn't it all come apart anyway? Doesn't it all come apart anyway, even now? Bravely, we take on graveyard clothing, transformed to gold by hope. Slipping out the front door as our mothers and relatives sip coffee and comfort, we enter the storm seeking peace. And we hear in the Therigatha some really wonderful accounts of what their life was before, and then what happened. And it strikes me right where I live. And that poem, when I was reciting it before there was a distraction that arose, I was starting to have tears in my eyes. I didn't actually reread it until just now. Doesn't it all come apart anyway, even now? And then we take on graveyard clothing, which is a reference to how monks would, in the old days, gather cloth scraps from shrouds of dead people, just discarded clothing that the culture considered too taboo to touch. But we don't have the same taboos around death as Buddhists. And then transformed to gold by hope. So a lot of us wear clothing that's kind of gold colored. This is a little more copper, but yeah. So right. So we take, the worst of everything, and we turn it into fuel for our awakening. You remember the old, this was an Aesop's fable of Rumpelstiltskin?
Yeah.
Always one of my favorites, because the girl took such a terrible situation and she spun it. She spun the straw into gold. And, whatever horrible things happen in life, we transform it into something useful for our awakening or helpful for other people. At this point, I don't know of any rotten thing that's ever happened to me, except, always the most recent ones. But I don't know of any rotten thing that's ever happened to me that I wouldn't say, yeah, that was good because of gaining this understanding, because of gaining this heartfelt empathy for people in that situation, for gaining these insights. Like it all spins into gold. Just like we in the old days take graveyard clothing and turn it into these beautiful robes. We take whatever horrible things happen to us and we spin it into the most amazing valuable material for helping others, for developing our own wisdom. If life had been easy and perfect, who would have done this crazy thing of going forth and being a nun? Like, who would have done such a thing?
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. I'm going to move on to a little bit different topic now. There recently was a literary scandal involving the Therigatha, and you were one of the leading figures who brought attention to it, and you also led a very successful campaign to have the book withdrawn from publication and republished now. So can you talk a little bit about the background and how did you first hear about the book? How did you notice there was a problem, and how did you launch this successful campaign?
Thanks. I hope it was successful. I hope that the average person picking up that book now or reading the reviews now are fully alerted to it being modern poetry and not the words of the elders in scripture. I think people are still coming up with, as so-and-so said. and no one said such a thing except an American fellow a couple of years ago, not ancient wise elders. People rely on this sort of scripture to inform or round out or even more fully inform their understanding of the Dhamma. And when someone who does not have a full grasp of the Dhamma writes something else and calls it that, the result is an absolute disaster because it affects people's practice, it affects their insight, it affects their ability to move forward. The Therigatha is confrontational. The original words of the elders, when they're not watered down or replaced, hearken us to something quite different than what you're going to hear when you pick up a magazine, read when you pick up a magazine, or you hear when you are watching a sitcom, or you're going to catch from the people around you. The people around you are going to buffer and comfort you and tell you that the suboptimal situation of samsara is okay. The Therigatha does not tell you that at all. What we read in the Therigatha are women, actual female voices in ancient times, telling us about their escape from a very dangerous, precarious position. So then that creates the question, why is that a dangerous, precarious situation? And so then you can search into that and find out. It may not be suitable reading for every person at every phase in their life. You know, a person who is so wounded that what they need right now is to staunch the bleeding and find some stability and normalcy and simple pleasures of life. This is not the book for you, right? But if you're in a position, in a state of either upheaval where you're really ready to let things go, or in a situation of stability where you can let go without getting completely upside down and lost. You can, when you have a strong compass that still tells you this way is north, this way is up, then this book might be just the right thing at the right time. The male companion book, the Therigatha, little feminist spin. It does offer some stories of transformation. A lot of it is kind of straight Dhamma, not dry if your heart leaps up on hearing straight Dhamma, but doesn't have this lively quality of talking about our lives, and not so much as the Therigatha. And it very well could be, just like you may have experienced, any of us females in robes have experienced, any of us Westerners in robes have experienced. People want to know why. I don't know if the average person from, say, Thailand, who is a male person who's become a monastic, gets asked why quite so often as a Westerner would, male or female, or particularly as a female would. Why? So we get asked why. Probably those ladies back then, being pioneers, probably got asked why a lot. So maybe that's the reason so many of the poems associated with them tell why. Just because it was often a request of them, even among each other, as we see in the probably later poem of Isidasi, where she's explaining how she had such a devastating series of experiences in lay life that but she sat down with her companion. The companion said, "You're young and beautiful. Why? Why are you in the holy life?" So back to that. Okay, so we've been going over in there's a private Buddhist group where I sometimes do some teaching, and I was invited to go over the Therigatha with them, because I'm a girl and all that. So they were going over scripture. So I just happened to be handy. They're like, "Hey, would you go over the Therigatha?" And I think they expected to go through the entire Therigatha in a matter of weeks or a few months, and it's more than a year. It's still counting, just slowly through. Park done it so long that we now do other kinds of sutta studies in between the Therigatha. People were getting, wanted to go over some other suttas. So week by week, poem by poem, usually about one poem a week, we would delve into it, and we found some handy resources, and I collected a couple more. So we had, the Halsey translation, we had the Rhys Davis translation, we had the Ken Norman translation, we had the, of course, the Sujata's translation. and others as available out of various anthologies. Venerable Tanisuro, Susan work. I realize she isn't actually a translation so much as a rendering. But anyway, so we have these various resources. And so we didn't just stick to one translation, since none of us were Pali scholars, and we would just go over Pali phrases that we knew, but to really get to the heart of it, we would need multiple translations, because one translation can only capture a certain angle or two or three.
Mm.
So we would, just patiently read one after another. You get a different sense of what the poem is when you do that, when you have 6, 7, 8 translations.
Mm.
And then someone came up with the Mary Wangast book. And so we would read that, and it's as though you had a choir singing along, and then suddenly somebody went, just with this really loud, flat note. And we would just puzzle, like, what? Where did he get that? And then we started laughing about it. And then at some point I said, I don't even want to hear what he has butchered on this one. Let's just keep moving. Just forget the Weingast translation. So, we had translations. Also, we had Mahendra translation, which is available free online. We had Jnanananda's translation, which is more of a rendering, but it's also very nice, very simple. And then we had the Weingast something or other, whatever that was. And so at some point, I sat down and wrote an essay about, this isn't a translation. And is that important? Yes, this is why that's important. This is not, if I had just sat down and read through it, I would have thought, it doesn't seem so familiar. I must be misremembering. But when we were going poem by poem, and you've got 6, 7, 8, sometimes even 9 translations, that all have a certain gist. And then you have this one outlier that's coming up with these other ideas, sometimes quite wrong, sometimes quite opposed even to what was indicated by the words of the poem. It was quite striking. It was could not ignore that. And then some of these students mentioned to me in the class, I bought this thinking it was a translation. I read it thinking it was a translation. I'm in your studies on the Therigatha because I was inspired by what I thought was a translation, and I'm so confused. And so it was clear to me that some people who were very highly intelligent people had thought they were reading real scripture when they were getting this other strange outlying thing. So that is why I sat down and wrote that thing. But I put it on the shelf for 2 months. Not thinking I'm putting it on the shelf for 2 months. I couldn't do it. I couldn't publish it. I could not. I had the intention of putting it onto Sutta Central's Discuss and Discover, where it's an appropriate place to discuss scripture. I didn't want to do that. I know how one word spoken can become such a big deal. I didn't want to draw a lot of controversy. I frankly would prefer not to be known anywhere by anybody. Little me living here, doing my own little thing with a small smattering of half enthusiastic people keeping me alive and keeping my Charlotte British Bahara going. It's like I'm not set up for controversy. I don't have like this big sangha around me that could protect and comfort me and tell me, no, you're okay. You weren't wrong to say such and such in response. You're good. I didn't have that. I had no filter, no shield from the rest of the world. I'm just out here like this in a very exposed, very vulnerable. I'm the only known English speaking Buddhist in a city of 1 million people. Think about it. 900 something thousand people. Yeah. So or certainly the only visible one. There's one that's famous, but she's actually famous in other places, not in the city. A lay woman. Anyway, so just to say, I felt so small and a bit vulnerable to go up against some big forces there. I mean, he's I mean, somebody's publishing that. It's getting bought up. So there's moneyed interest in there. And there's partisans to the poems, people who love them. It's filled with 4 and 5-star reviews. I didn't know then they just actually cut out the low reviews, but it's filled with big reviews. Powerful. It's like, do you really want to do that when you just need a peaceful setting in order to do your life work and practice? Like, really, is this what you want to do? Do you really want to jump into a maelstrom, create a maelstrom out of nothing where there's peace? Right now it's peaceful, everything's at peace, no problem for you, and unless you create some commotion there. And then of course, even much more on my mind was that there were my sister Bhikkhunis, having written the foreword, having helped edit it, promoting it, doing retreats based on it. And I respect them, I adore them, I look up to them. And I don't want to embarrass them and I don't want to alienate them. So what do you do with that? So for 2 months, I couldn't do it. I just couldn't do it. And then somebody wrote a note on this Discuss and Discover, praising the book. And that did it. It's like it snapped. It just snapped. I'm like, I'm doing this even though I'm not going to like paying for this. I am one known for speaking up in times when a wise person would have been quiet. I was trying not to do that for once. But when I read that, I just snapped. I'm like, I have to do this. I cannot be quiet. I have to say this. And just kind of sit there and go, oh gosh, what's going to happen now? I don't know. While I was drafting it, there's this tricky bit about drafting things on Discuss and Discover. I'll never do this again. When you draft in the system, all it takes is one slip of the finger, the thing is published. So when I was about 3/4 of the way through with it, it published.
I saw it. Yes, I saw it back then.
I took it down immediately.
I was so disappointed when you took it down. I was so happy when I saw it. I was so disappointed when you took it down, but I was so happy that you published it again then those few months later.
What happened was that Bhante Kemarata, I think. Yeah, Kemarata saw it and immediately responded. I'm like, no, I just, no. But he responded encouragingly. So we corresponded a little bit. His encouragement had a huge impact on my eventual ability to publish. And I consulted a nun who is well familiar with me and the Bhikkhunis who had been promoting this. And she had cautioned me, don't do it, talk with her, talk with them, don't publish that thing. Which I actually didn't have the courage to do. I didn't consult with them. Well, in part out of just fear and worry, and in part that, they were deeply into it. So there was nothing I was going to say that was going to change that, I didn't think. But then they might have said, please don't. And I couldn't have bared the being torn in 2 directions that way. Don't, but I have to. So something else that was in my mind is that I could not be the only person who was disturbed by this, by this book, but who else could speak up? I was in a bit of a unique position in that the bhikkhus, if they spoke up, might look anti-woman. I mean, it just, the cancel culture can be quite cruel and sudden and uninformed. So they might have gotten some heavy negative feedback on the wrong basis, or they might have feared it, or they might just not have noticed that this was going on. But I just thought if a bhikkhu were worried about this, he might not feel like he could say anything. And then being a bhikkhuni, a lay person being disturbed by it, what platform do they have? But a bhikkhuni speaking up about the poetry about the bhikkhunis has kind of a natural platform that people would say, oh, what does this bhikkhuni have to say about this? Oh, controversial, I'm going to read that. I'm going to read that. But among the bhikkhunis, surely I wasn't the only one who was disturbed by the book, but who else would be senior to everybody who loved it? Who else would have been the reader of the proclamations and the ordinations of those who were promoting it? So I felt like, the deep and profound respect we have within Sangha for our time in robes, the state of a person being an elder, gave me a kind of permission to say something that the very junior people might hesitate more. As much as I hesitated, surely someone who had years less of seniority would hesitate more, because we really do respect each other. We really do respect the time in robes. When a person has been in the robes, they represent the Sangha. They might represent the Sangha beautifully, or they might represent the Sangha a bit sort of badly, but the fact is they have more time than oneself in these robes. That is to be respected, because that's a kind of an anonymity aspect of this whole thing. We do respect each other, of course, based on someone being very learned in the Vinaya, very learned in the Dhamma, and so forth. But there's also just the fact of, you are somebody who's been doing this thing X number of years, and I've been doing this thing X minus Y number of years. Therefore, I bow down to you, to that robe, out of respect for the Sangha itself. You've been representing it a while. And so just, the happenstance of having been one of the earliest pioneers among the Westerners, I felt like I just looked around me and I didn't see anyone else who could do that. Also, the analytical mind, the legal training wasn't completely wasted. That my parents certainly do think the money on it was.
So Ayya, thank you so much, deep from my heart, that you had the courage to speak up.
Thank you. Before we move on then, I have to say, I dropped that stone in the water. Kablush, kablush, kablush. But it was, and then there was that, the author asked for a conversation regarding it. And so we had that conversation, and everybody's just going along with the charm. He was just so charming. He was lovely, very charming. And everybody's being silenced by the charm. He invited us specifically to discuss the issues raised in that essay. And then it turned out to be a meet and greet with the author. So I finally spoke up and said, okay, what are you going to do about it? Shock, 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 shock. And just created chaos in the meeting. And shut down the meeting and earned me permanent enemies, I think, from what I've seen. And yeah. So, but that was when we finally had him for the only time on record. He knew people were buying it thinking it was scripture. He knew it. And he wanted nothing to change. We did not have, all that time I'd been blaming the publisher up to that moment. And then I thought, oh, this is someone without a conscience. This is someone who knows it's being sold as scripture and doesn't want that to change. Wow. Wow, what have we fallen for here? We've fallen for something a lot deeper than just some fellow who has accidentally done a bad thing, accidentally done something that had a bad effect. This is someone who knows what he's doing. He wants it to continue. He wants to shut down the conversation. He didn't want to bring forth the conversation and find out what he could do to fix the situation where people are mistaking his words for scripture. It happened one time that someone gave a talk in which they had mistaken something I had written for something the Buddha had said. And I was truly, truly disturbed and horrified and tried to set it straight immediately. I just can't imagine going along and smiling and being happy, knowing that these books are selling that are my words and being missold as the ancient nuns' poetry. And that hits so many levels. How much ancient female writing do we have? Very little. How much ancient female poetry do we have? Very little. How much ancient female-oriented scripture do we have? Very little. So for that to get upended and lost and covered over was a disaster for modern people, the casual reader. Also a disaster for Buddhist students who were being misled on what is the Dhamma. Our sense pleasure is the great thing, or our relationships as mother and sister and so forth that are highlighted in Maddie's version. If you looked at Mahapajapati's, the version in Maddie has her ultimately rejoicing in her relationship with men, whereas she's rejoicing in the fact that this is all over in her actual poem. Like, you couldn't have gone more, more of a 180 on the meaning of her poem. And people are reading this thinking, this is the way, this is the Dhamma, this is the direction to direct my mind to find liberation from the pain of life, from samsara. That's very dangerous. But even more dangerous is that if a library has limited space, how many translations are they going to give space to? This thing was the Library of Congress codified as scripture, as the Therigatha. How many others do they need to have on their shelf? And then what happens when society isn't doing so well? I'm sorry, but I don't have all that optimistic idea around climate change and upheaval. So if society isn't doing so well, and a librarian, a brave, hearty librarian, is loading up a cart with the most important books to get out of a burning library, they're going to grab Maddie's. they're going to grab the others and run out with that one, which is not the one that deserves to be preserved for the end times. And, if we lose the internet for a period or for forever, what are we going to have on our shelves? Everybody will have Maddie. And so 99 out of 100 people who have a Therigatha book will have Maddie's, in the West, at least, if things were to continue the way they were. And even if if Armageddon-ish scenario were to happen now, we don't have the internet anymore, Maddie's would probably prevail still. Like, we really do need to promote the real thing, which is why I'm so grateful you are doing this festival to promote the real thing, to help us see what actually is the Therigatha. That's why my friend put up that website, therigatha.org, wanting to have actual renderings with links to very scholarly translations behind every poem, so that you could, so that the more of the world will know this is what the elders said, and these powerful words of transformation and truth, liberation, and female spiritual power will stay in this world a very long time. We don't imagine that Buddhism is going to stay around forever. The Buddha told us himself, it won't. Like, the Dhamma will always exist, but the human insight into it and how to work with it and how to work with underlying processes of the mind to overcome samsara, that's going to go. The longer we can keep every little bit of liberating scripture, the better.
Yeah, so thank you so much for finding the courage to speak up. I was so happy when I saw your essay, because I had known about the poems for a few months at that point, and I didn't know what to do, and it made me very upset. And what can you do? But you threw the first stone in, and then it had this ripple effect, and everybody came together, and the campaign was actually quite successful, and the book was.
I did not lead that campaign. I'm going to say, starting to get to that point. I forgot. Pardon me for interrupting, but yes, I sent out that stone that did the initial ripples, but it was very skilled people that really pushed that forward. And one monk actually went through and even analyzed what percentage of the poems were real translations. I think it was 2 poems out of the whole collection were actual translations. significantly the very first poem in the whole collection was. So if you just flip open, look at the first poem, is that an accident? Anyway, he analyzed it throughout, of the various qualities that you found in the Weingast version versus the real thing. Like it's really worth taking a look at all of that. I know there are links on Discuss and Discover, but I don't remember. I'm so sorry. Maybe you could post it somewhere, the links to his analyses.
We have it on our website, the Therigatha Festival website. So people check out our resources page, you can find it there.
Right. Okay, so yeah, so ending on not a note about that, but I was actually wanting to share my favorite, but I don't have a favorite, but I was actually thinking to share one that shouldn't be a favorite because it's just such a common one. And I feel like I did not look carefully at the numbers to make sure whether people are looking at this one, but I had the idea that 6.4 would have been Sujata. Is that one that anyone has analyzed or looked at specially?
No, not yet so far.
Yeah. And so what I love about it is that this is a woman who's living just this happy life, and decked out in her best jewels and hanging out with her girls, and she goes down to the park, she has a great time, and then she finds this monastery in the woods on the way home, stops in, meets the Buddha, and gets enlightened. Like, who would think that transformation could come from a happy place? No, not on your knees in misery and sorrow, but even women who are at the height of what a person's power could be in this world, and happiness, living in abundance, living in fun and frivolity, and then suddenly, boom! One of our bhikkhunis has a story similar to that. She was at a resort and trying to decide between tennis and something else, and the uselessness of it hit her. And
I think I know which one you're talking about. I think she told me the same story. It's quite remarkable.
She gave up so much money in her renunciation that the bank actually contacted her to make sure she hadn't gone crazy. So we really do have, high functioning people. We have at least one Harvard graduate among our bhikkhunis. We have a Yale graduate, I think, among our bhikkhunis. We have, not that those are necessarily, we have occasional attorney, even an attorney can turn around and see the truth. Like, a lot of people are get into this, even from high-powered places and successful lives. And one of ours was a scientist with how many? 21 published articles in Science. More were even being published in her name after she had gone forth. So that's one of our Australian bhikkhunis, So I just want to share this poem, if I may.
Yes, please go ahead.
And this is my rendering. Shall I read the Pali? And if the time is how's the time? Shall I read the Pali?
I'm not in a rush. I think you are more in a rush than I am.
I'm supposed to be in a rush. I have guests meditating outside right now.
Okay.
My guest, Ayya Jenna, can attend to them. Okay, so I haven't rehearsed it, but I'll just go with this. Alankata Suvasana, Malinik Chandanukhita, Sabba Bharana Sanjahana, Dasi Ganapurakata, looking glamorous, decked out in my finest, donning garlands of flowers, potent with sandalwood, absolutely dripping with gold and jewels, and surrounded by my girls. Anang pa nanacha adaya ghajang bojang anapakan gehato nikhamitwana uya nabhiha rayin, bringing food and drinks, everything, entrees to desserts in abundance. I took off from the house, headed to the entertainment park. Tatta ramitva kilitva agajhanti sakangharang viharang datung pavising sakate anjanang vanang. Had a great time hanging out and playing, Then on the way home, near Therigatha town in Anjana woods, I saw and felt drawn into a monastery. Disavana lokapadjotang, vanditavana upavisang, so met dhammamadesesi, anukampaya chakahuma. Finding the light of the world, I paid homage and sat to one side. In compassion, the one with penetrative vision taught me the Dhamma. Sutawa chako mahesisa, sachan sampati vijhadhang, tate tateva virajang dhammang, husaying amatang padang. On hearing the great holy man, I penetrated the truth. Right there, the pure Dhamma, the deathless state, touched. Tato vininya tasadhamma, pabajing anagaryang, tisa vidya anupata amoghang buddhasasanangti. Then knowing the true Dhamma, I went forth into homelessness. Attained is the triple knowledge, effective is the Buddha's teaching.
Very beautiful.
Again, that was number 6.4, Sujata.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for giving me your time. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you so much for coming. I think as a last question, many of the viewers will want to know if your teachings, the teachings you've given throughout the last year, are they recorded? Are they available somewhere? Can people find them?
They're recorded on the Students of the Path private Buddhist group. And I have not yet considered making them so public because, there's the people you have right sitting in front of you that you're familiar with. They're young. You can speak very casually with them. And then there's the whole world that have all their expectations of propriety of a bhikkhuni and, dignity and, what is even suitable to discuss from your own life. And the casualness with which these young people on the Discord server and, it might not be all that suitable or useful for everyone, for people who delight in hearing the Dhamma spoken of in a very casual, friendly, fan down manner, so to speak, with a lot of personal anecdotes. It's a wonderful thing. But I think, so if any of my sisters want to hear it, certainly we'll get you an invitation onto the server.
Okay, I will take up your invitation then. I'd really love to hear them. And for the rest of the world, I think we should even rejoice even more that you had the time to join us today, because that's a very special privilege. Thank you so much for being here, for sharing your stories, for sharing your love for the Therigatha, for sharing all your knowledge. And it was really special to have you. And for our viewers, if you're interested, Ayya Sudhamma also has a chanting on YouTube where she chants all the epithets for the Buddha that the nuns use in the Therigatha, and it's very, very beautiful. We have a link on our website, therigathafestival.net. You can find the link to her chanting there. And also, if you have time, check out Ayya Sudhamma's website that she mentioned a few times, therigatha.org, where she put some of her resources. And it's also very, very interesting. Please go and check that out. And I'll try to leave all the links in the description box below the video. And
would you also be sure to link to the translation by Mahenda or Mahendra? I changed his name, I forget which it is, but the Therigatha Pali.
Yes,
it's a obscure translation that he's done in a very obscure way, just free.
I have to check if we have it on the website. If not, I can certainly put it there. No problem.
Yeah.
And one special announcement, Ayya Sudhamma will also be on our live discussion panel on May 16th. So if people have any questions for her, please join us there and ask her live. Registration for the event is very important because spaces are limited. So please go to our website and secure your space. Don't wait too long. And Ayya Sudhamma, once again, thank you so much for coming. And I was so happy to have you today.
Thank you so much.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.